And Denise, if you don't mind pulling up the PowerPoint, we'll do a quick agenda overview. Okay, thanks. So here's the agenda for today. We'll do a brief introductions and icebreaker here in a minute. We'll do some backgrounds on both the role of the Rulemaking Advisory Committee and a little bit of context when it comes to rulemaking, and then some FIP program background. I know many of you are very familiar with FIP, but it'll at least be a refresher for you. And then we'll get into the first part of the rule revisions. So we have the first 4 or 5 sections to get through today. We have a public comment period. There was no written public comment that was submitted in advance of this meeting, but we may have some verbal public comment today. And then we'll do a little bit of a wrap up and next steps, and we'll definitely get you out of here by noon, if not well in advance of that. So next slide, please, Denise. Okay, so next we have our introductions and a little bit of an icebreaker question. So if you want to, I'll go around, we'll call on you, and if you want to give your name, your organization, and the role that you play in your organization, as well as what is your secret hidden talent. So I'll start by going just to OWEB staff to give people a little bit of a chance to think about your secret hidden talent, and we'll start with Denise.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Denise Hoffert. I am one of OWEB's partnerships coordinators, and I work with the focused investment partners throughout the state, as well as the partnership technical assistance grant program. And I'm going to say for my secret hidden talent that I really enjoy riding a road bike 40 miles an hour down a big steep mountain path in my free time. Also climbing up the hill, but like that's not as fun as screaming down the other side. So thanks.
Thanks, Denise. We'll go next to Eric Williams.
Good morning, everybody. Eric Williams. I'm the Restoration Grant Program Manager at OWEB. And a talent, I think, that probably drives my wife nuts because she always says things like, "How do you know that?" is an ability to recall completely useless, obscure information. Like I can tell you the batting order of the 1977 Yankees. Who cares, right? But I know it, and it won't leave my head for some reason. I wish it would, because it would make room for more important things. But anyway, here we are. Nice to see everyone.
Thanks, Eric. And I appreciate that you can recall the battery of the 1983 Detroit Tigers. So.
Ooh.
Okay. Next, we'll go to Audrey.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Audrey Hatch, the Conservation Outcomes Coordinator at OWEB, and my role with the FIPS is around progress tracking, including progress tracking reports. And I'm gonna go with an old school hidden talent of typing speed. In high school, I took a typing class and I exceeded the typing speed requirements quite quickly. And I actually still use that today. Thanks.
Impressive, Audrey. Do you remember what your words per minute were?
Oh, it's like over 65, 70, even 80 sometimes, Eric.
Ooh, Audrey, you and Ivy should have a contest. I think she's about that same level. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
Wow. Okay. And good morning, everybody. My name is Eric Hartstein. I'm the Senior Policy Coordinator at OWEB. My secret hidden talent is thumb wrestling. You know, the 1, 2, 3, 4, I declare a thumb war. I don't think I've ever lost, actually. So it's not because I have like a freakishly long thumb or anything. It's just, I think I'm attribute it all to strategy when it comes to the thumb wrestling. Okay, so next we'll go to the RAC members, and I'll start with people as I see you on the screen. So Jamie Stevens, welcome.
Good morning, I'm Jamie Stevens, Director of Conservation at Klamath Bird Observatory. Secret talent throughout high school and college, I worked in a frame shop. So all of the things necessary to get your artwork on your wall.
Nice, thanks Jamie. Next we'll go to Melissa.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Melissa Petschauer. I work for High Desert Partnership. I'm the Harney Basin Ecological Coordinator here. I would say maybe my secret talent is that I bake a lot, but I guess I never really shared it until last year. I entered into our Harney County Fair here, and I won Best in Show, and everyone was like, "I didn't even know you baked." So it went well for me.
Awesome, yeah, that's great. Thanks, Melissa. Brandy.
Hi, everybody. Brandy St. Clair, Lakeview SWCD project manager. I guess one of my secret hitting talents would be just absolutely crushing it in the batting cages and playing softball. But I used to play softball growing up, and recently got back into going to the batting cages whenever we go out of town, where the big city has those, and I've still got it. So.
All right. Somehow that's not surprising, Brandy. We'll have something to talk about at the next Sage Grouse meeting. Next, let's go to Andy.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Andy Spurka with ODF&W. I'm the Private Forestry Grant Coordinator. I'm filling in today on behalf of Chris Lorian, the Conservation Planning Coordinator with ODF&W. He got called out on assignment. One of my secret talents would be being the coach of an adult kickball league. It takes quite the effort to get everyone together every week, half a year.
It's impressive. Yeah, thanks, Andy, and welcome. Let's go next to Brad.
Morning, Brad Knight, Oregon Desert Land Trust, Deputy Director at that organization. My secret talent, inspired by the thumb wrestler, is this. You can't see it, but making your finger move like that independently. Actually, my developing secret talent is learning to talk without my two top front teeth. I had an accident many years ago, and now I'm paying the price for that and awaiting implants. So apologies for my ghoulish appearance, but yeah. So I'm learning to enunciate with, and this is brand new to me as of a couple of days. So that's my secret talent. We'll see if it's a talent. It may not emerge as such, but trying to get there.
Okay, well, you're coming through loud and clear right now, Brad. Thank you. Let's go next to Leah.
Good morning, folks. Leah Tai. I'm a hydrologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in our Conservation Partnerships Division. And my secret talent that I've been putting to use a lot lately with my kids is extremely excellent recollection for camp songs. I used to be a camp counselor many years ago, and I can't remember the lyrics to anything that I like to listen to, but I can really remember the lyrics to like the Princess Pat and the Candle King and several other key children's songs.
Thanks, Leah. That's quite the talent. Let's go next to Herb.
Yeah, hi everybody. Name's Herb Winters. I'm the district manager at Gillum SWCD, and my secret talent is probably going fishing without actually fishing. So I spend most of the time fishing, rigging up my kids' fishing poles over and over again, and so that's my secret talent.
A good one. I'm sure there's plenty of line untangling there, Herb, if my experience is similar to yours. Let's go next to Christy.
Hi, everybody. Christy Foster. I'm the executive director at Tillamook Estuaries Partnership in Garibaldi on the coast. My secret talent is that I am a really good bowler. Just never even practicing. If I just go to the lanes, I'm going to average 130s, 140s. When I was little, I was in leagues and my average was like 178. So if I was to go practice at all, I'd be way up there. So really good. I just tell everybody I'm genetically predispositioned to be a good bowler because I'm Polish in my background. And if you ever watch professional bowling, most of the folks are from Wisconsin area and their names go all the way across their shirts. So that is my secret. It's in my blood.
Wow, impressive. Yeah, thanks, Christy. And then we'll go to Haley.
Hi, my name's Haley Lutz, and I'm the executive director for Coos Watershed Association. I think I have a knack for interior design. I have a very cozy house and something I enjoy doing.
Great. Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Haley. And I think that's everybody on the rack. Don't worry, folks, if you're not on the rack and you're just here observing, we won't make you go through the hidden secret talent exercise. Next, we'll do a little bit of background on the rack process itself. So I think just to start things off, I really want to thank the Rulemaking Advisory Committee for participating here with this. Administrative rules really are the backbone of OWEB's grant programs, and it's really, really critical to have your input as we look to revise the rules for the FIP program. And I guess on that note, I'd see this as a small but really quite important part of the democratic process in government here in Oregon. So that while we'll have, I think, a pretty good time in developing the revisions to the FIP rules, we're also serving a critical role for the state of Oregon, and I really want to thank you for that. So administrative rules are developed by agencies and boards and commissions in the state to implement and interpret the agency's statutory authority. So we file the rules with the Oregon Secretary of State, so you can see everything on the website. And it's a formal process when we do agency rulemaking, which includes both the boards or commissions initiating rulemaking, developing a rulemaking advisory committee to discuss potential changes to rules, formal public comment periods on rules, and then we always want to make sure that we're running our draft rules by our Department of Justice counsel to make sure that everything is on the up and up and that we're in line with our statutory authority. And ultimately, we go to, in our case, the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board for ultimate approval of administrative rules. So next slide, please, Denise. So how does OWEB use administrative rules? We use them to interpret statute, to describe the solicitation, review, funding decisions, and administration of our grant programs. Do all OWEB grant programs have separate administrative rules? Yes, we do now. All OWEB grants fit under our various rule divisions, and all of them tier off the broad OWEB grant program rules, which we're sometimes referred to as Division 5 rules. So we'll talk a little bit more about Division 5 when we get into the actual text in the rules. But it's kind of the umbrella rule set that kind of oversees all of OWEB's administrative rules. So the role of the Rulemaking Advisory Committee, or the RAC, and a little bit of rulemaking context. So the OWEB board initiates rulemaking if we have existing rules that need to be amended, or if we're developing new rules for one of our new grant programs. So staff forms the Rulemaking Advisory Committee, or the RAC, to help develop rule language to ultimately bring back to the OWEB board for approval. So you as a RAC will serve as an advisory body to OWEB with the role of providing advice and framing policy choices for the agency. The agency ultimately retains the rulemaking authority in Oregon, but we really do strive to achieve consensus in this process with the RAC in a way that really tries to understand all the interests and really work together to find workable solutions as we go through these rule revisions. Statute does require us to seek the RAC's recommendation on whether rule changes will have a fiscal impact, what that fiscal impact will be, whether the rule will have a significant adverse impact on small businesses. We don't think any of the proposed revisions that we'll talk about here in the FIP program, or really any of OWEB's administrative rules, will have a negative fiscal impact, but really kind of keep this in mind as we go through our discussions of the next few meetings. The RAC that we have developed here is comprised of individuals that represent the interests of persons that are most likely to be impacted by the rules. So we have grant applicants, grantees, people on agencies that may serve as technical reviewers. So we've really done our best to get all of you as representatives from across the states, different size organizations, and focus on the work that you do. So with that, we will hope to have a really rich discussion today once we get to the actual revisions or proposed revisions to at least the initial set of the rules. And for a little bit of background, I will turn it over to Eric to talk about the FIP program itself.
All right, thanks, Eric. I think this might be familiar to many of you, but I think it's helpful to just provide this background on the program to inform how we're approaching proposed changes to the administrative rules. And I think you've probably seen some OWEB materials talking about the board identified ecological priorities for a partnership to enter into the FIP program. They need to be addressing one of those 7 priorities. The program is designed to achieve measurable ecological outcomes, which is a challenging thing to do. And also, to be eligible, a partnership has to have a strategic action plan that has a theory of change, a results change, showing how the proposed actions are going to get to those ecological outcomes, and is to be implemented by a high-performing partnership, which we'll talk about in a minute. And there's actually a definition of what that is, because many people often ask that question. What does it mean to be a high-performing partnership? So let's go to the next slide here. This diagram just shows you kind of how activities are nested in a SAP, an SAP. Those typically have a much longer term horizon than a FIP initiative, up to 30 years and sometimes even longer. The FIP initiative covers a period of 6 years of investment, which really works out to maybe 9 or 10 years of project implementation. And with each of the 3 biennia that the program is active, there's a detailed work plan for each of those 2-year periods, showing the activities, the restoration actions, acquisition actions that are planned to achieve those outcomes. And the high performing partnership here that's referenced in the slide, it's the definition we have is it's a collaborating group of organizations with an existing governance structure that includes a formal decision-making process resulting in an effective performance history. And I think that's a piece that can be challenging for partnerships because part of decision-making is picking priorities, and that means where your investments are going. In a partnership of organizations, typically that means the investment is not going to occur equally across the participating organizations, but rather be programmed effectively to achieve the priority work that's identified in their 2-year work plans and in their 6-year FIP initiative, and ultimately in their longer term SAP. And let's go to the next slide. In terms of OWEB's overall grant making, the FIP, as you can see in the pie chart, is really a significant investment for the OWEB board, constituting almost 30% of its biennial spending plan. And you can see there that about half is through our regular open solicitation programs, 14% in our capacity investments, and then we have some other investments making up the rest. But this was intentional when the FIP program was initiated by the board in 2015. They started out at a little bit lower percentage of the spending plan, but talked from the beginning about over time increasing that to about the 30% level. And so that's where we are today. And it's something that our board will continue to revisit with each biennial spending plan. For now anyway, with each biennium, the board has been targeting about $11 million to invest in new FIPs. And so at any given time, we'll have 3 cohorts of FIPs active. Right now, we have about 14 active FIPs, I think. Sometimes I lose track because we're on the 4th cohort, and it's actually been really exciting to have that many initiatives across the state. In terms of the geography, I'll turn it over to Denise to talk about those ecological priorities and where we're at with investing across those priorities.
When you're in speaker view, all of the controls go to the top of the screen, so not at the bottom of the screen. So we have, as Eric mentioned, ecological priorities. These were determined by the OWEB board with significant input from natural resource agencies and partners from around the state. And this is just to remind folks about what those current priorities are. So we have oak woodland and prairie habitat, sagebrush, sage steppe habitat, coho habitat and populations along the Oregon coast, Oregon closed lakes, basin, wetlands habitat, aquatic habitat for native fish species, dry type forest habitat, and coastal estuaries in Oregon. And here's a map showing where those ecological priority investments have been made to date. So with the awards in cohort 3 in 2021, we then had a FIP representing at least one FIP representing each of those 7 ecological priorities for the first time. So now there have been investments made throughout the state in each of those 7. And this map has a lot of information on it, and it's probably at a scale that is a little bit tricky to read depending on what your monitor size is. But the key over here, each of these colors and hashings is representing one of the ecological priorities. And then the labels, the ones that are labeled in brown, were cohort 1. So that includes the upper and middle Willamette main stem, the Deschutes, Oregon model to protect sage grouse in the, well, I'm going to get the geography, that's the Warner. And then the Oregon model to protect sage grouse also included is this Malheur, Eric? This wasn't my FIP.
It included Malheur, Harney, and Lake counties, yes.
Malheur, Harney, and Lake. So the Oregon model for sage grouse, and then the Ashland Forest All Lands Restoration Partnership as well. In cohort 2, the Warner Basin down by Lakeview, the Rogue Forest Initiative in Southwest Oregon, the Clackamas Restoration Initiative up in the metro region in Portland, and John Day native fish habitat in North Central Oregon, and lastly, the Baker Sage Grouse implementation team out in Eastern Oregon. In cohort 3, we awarded the first time the Oak Initiative down in Southern Oregon, as well as the East Cascades Oak Initiative in the Gorge, and 3 coastal FIPs for the first time, Coastal Coho, and as well as the Estuaries Collaborative working on the Central Coast. And our most recently awarded FIPs for cohort 4 are in these red circles because we don't yet have they were so recently awarded in April, we don't yet have their geography loaded to our base map here, but they include the Hood River Basin Partnership for an aquatic focused FIP up in North Central Oregon, the Klamath Lake Forest Health Partnership, Oregon All Counties, focusing on sagebrush, sage steppe, and then the Harney Basin Wetlands Collaborative. And this partnership represents the first partnership to come in to receive, both Harney and sage grouse coming in to receive FIP funding for a second round of FIP support from OWEB. So just a little bit of context for the partnerships that have been awarded around the state and the ecological priorities that have been awarded through these cohorts. Here's the list. And so right now we're just going to do a really quick exercise in the chat and asking folks to just put in one of these letters so we can kind of gauge where we're at with the information that we're presenting here. And if folks have any questions, feel free to ask some questions now, or you can include those in the chat as well. Great, I'm seeing A's. And it's okay to give us a different letter grade, although this is being recorded. No, it's totally fine. You can use a different letter. Awesome. And I'm going to turn it back over to Eric to start talking about rules.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Denise and Eric, for that background. Before I do, are there any questions on anything that we just went over? Okay, not seeing any. I'm also cognizant of our agenda, which calls for a break after we did the background information. We're running quite a bit ahead of schedule. So are we okay to kind of push through right now? And some thumbs up, nodding heads. Yes, okay. Denise, if you don't mind pulling up, there we go. And maybe zooming in a little bit. I think that's good on my monitor. Does it look good for everybody else? Thumbs up, nodding heads. Okay. So before we kind of dive into the draft rule revisions here, just as maybe a bit of a reminder for people that it's been over 5 years since the FIP program rules were adopted by the board. You can see in each of the rule sections, there's sort of the history, and it'll show that the rules were filed and adopted back in early 2018. So since that time, we've identified some pretty minor, we think, technical corrections to the rules that we need to address, but also some more substantive revisions that we'll really value your input on. I think today, a lot of it will be probably more on that kind of that minor technical revisions to the rules. There might be a few things of substance though to talk about, but we'll definitely get into some of the meaty topics at some of the future meetings. So starting at the top, we have our purpose section of the rules. We have this for each of our administrative rules for our grant programs. What we did here, the proposed revision, is to add that this supplements the OEB grant program rules under OAR, Oregon Administrative Rule 695005. So that's the Division 5 rule set that I referenced earlier, which is the umbrella rule set. So what we're saying is that the FIP program rules builds off of that, and if there's specific requirements in these rules that conflict with any requirements in Division 5, that the focused investment partnership grant program rules take precedence. So any questions on that? Okay, not seeing any. We'll move down to the definition section. I see we inadvertently removed the D there in definition, so we'll get that back. This is a really important section. We don't have any really substantive revisions at this time, I think, in definitions, but it's something to be aware of as we go through the remainder of the sections. If there are terms that we're adding to the rule revisions, we'll want to make sure that we have those defined if there's going to be any question at all. Because we often go back to these definitions. Eric mentioned the high performing partnership earlier. We'll get into that here in a second. But it's, in my mind, one of the most important sections of any rule set is here in the definitions. So what we've proposed here in our draft revisions to definitions is, in what was previously number 2 here, the focus investment partnership development. Back when these rules were first adopted, there was 2 tracks in the FIP program. One was the FIP development, which has morphed into the partnership technical assistance grant offering that OEB has. It's been separated out of the FIP program for a variety of reasons. So we no longer have FIP development grants. So we're proposing to strike reference to that throughout this rule set. Similarly, what was number 3 talked about FIP implementation grants. That's what we have for FIP now, are these implementation, which we think is actually best reflected in what is number 1, which is the focus investment partnership means an OEB investment that addresses the board identified priority of significance to the state, achieves clear and measurable ecological outcomes, uses integrated and results-oriented approaches, as identified through a strategic action plan, and is implemented by a high-performing partnership. So I'll stop there and see if there's any questions on, why we're proposing to strike the old 2 and 3 and just go with number 1. Okay, not seeing any. I'm noticing something right now, actually, which is we in number 1, Denise, we have strategic action plan. That should be actually capitalized because we have that defined down below. And also high performing partnership for that matter. Great, thanks.
Eric, just a comment generally on that first one. And I didn't pull it up. I had it up a minute ago, but if you're using terms like measurable ecological outcomes is defined, clear is not, do we need that? Results oriented and, integrated. Do you need that phrasing? I'm not suggesting you do or don't, but if you don't, simpler is typically better. If those terms aren't defined.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Brad. I think that's a good insight. Because we define measurable ecological outcomes below, but this says clear and measurable ecological outcomes.
Yeah, I think you could get by just by using the terms you define, achieves measurable ecological outcomes and as identified in a strategic action plan, and just stick with your defined terms. Again, I don't know whether those are used. I'll pull it up here in a second, but okay. Later on in the rules.
Great. We'll let Denise catch up here on the notes. Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. And it's probably a good time to point out that what we'll do today as we go through, Denise is taking notes in the comments. I know Audrey's also taking some notes as well, kind of offline. What we'll do is, we have sort of the really kind of easy stuff like capitalizing strategic action plan. But we'll go through after we're done with this meeting as staff, look at the notes, make revisions to the rules in advance of the next RAC meeting. So we'll send out another version of the rules, which will reflect those changes. And then we'll touch on those at the next meeting and then go on to the next few sections that we're going to be discussing. So we're always going to be kind of moving back and making sure that we're capturing things that were discussed in the previous meeting before going on to the next sections. So, okay, thanks, Brad. We're not proposing any changes to the terms initiative or strategic action plan. We, in the new number 4, high performing partnership, we added that high-performing partnerships must have an existing strategic action plan as well as a governance structure that includes the formal decision-making process, which results in an effective performance history. Because we wanted to make sure that that strategic action plan is reflected, because it's a requirement that we have for all of the partnerships involved in a FIP initiative, and wanted to make sure that's reflected in the definition of the high-performing partnership.
I have a quick question about that, Eric.
Yeah.
So above that for strategic action plan, we defined it as that needs to include all the parts from OWEB. So is this implying for the high performing partnership that they need to come already with a strategic action plan that correlates with OWEB's requirements?
Yes. So
okay.
We have the strategic action plan template that is found on OWEB's website, and we want to make sure that the components found within that template are included in the strategic action plans that partnerships are coming to OWEB as part of their application materials.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that was clear. Perfect, thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, I see how to raise my hand. Is it okay if I ask a question as well?
Absolutely. Everybody should just feel free to chime in.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to ask if there are specific requirements of a strategic action plan or of a governance structure or of a formal decision-making process. Is it possible, or should we specify what those things are at this point? Because that sometimes a little bit confusing for the applicants, and they don't know if they've met those definitions, and they may be submitting when they aren't ready yet.
Christy, what was the third thing? Governance doc, strategic action plan.
And I'm just reading through the definition that's here in the performing partnership. So it's the strategic action plan, the governance structure, and the formal decision-making process. It's the three things that are in here. Thank you. I think there are a lot of definitions of all three of those things. Or things that what OWEB might think constitutes what is a strategic action plan versus what somebody else might think is one.
This is really nitpicky, but along the same lines, I wonder if the word formal is needed before a decision-making process. Because that decision-making process can look however folks want. It just needs to be defined, is my interpretation of that.
And I just popped into the chat. OWEB does have a guidance document on governance that I think would be helpful for folks that are looking for, well, what does this mean? In terms of what OWEB's expectations are, kind of similar to what we expect in a strategic action plan, although this one's less template oriented. There's much more flexibility for how you do it. But I think the document would be helpful for those looking for answers to those questions.
Yeah, thanks for popping that in the chat, Eric.
Would it, sorry, then a follow-up, then would it be appropriate to reference those here?
I think that's a good, oh, go ahead, Eric.
No, you go.
I think we probably might be saying the same thing, which is they are very useful references, and we we point people to them all the time. I'm a little reticent about including them in rule because these are things that are pretty static and takes a while to change, and those documents may change, or we may have additions to them, and if we're pointing to specific documents in rule, it might not reflect the most current understanding in 5 or 10 years.
Well, along that vein, I was curious whether the template and components of, for example, a strategic action plan have changed much in the last 5 to 10 years, or whether there are specific components that are static enough or so critical that they would be like, they would warrant kind of being included in the definition, but maybe not the whole template by reference, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. Well, and we say as a part of the strategic action plan definition here that plans will include all components identified by OWEB. It has changed over the years. I think it's probably a little more static now than it was 4 or 5 years ago, but we've definitely updated the strategic action plan guidance over the years. And I think maybe referencing it in this way, might be something we can consider for things like the governance document, governance guidance document that we have. So we're not maybe referencing it specifically, like pointing at something, but saying, components identified by OWEB and, the governance guidance might be a way to kind of get at Chrissy's comment from a minute ago. Okay. Okay, good discussion. Are there other thoughts on the high-performing partnership definition? If not, we can move down into, we didn't suggest any changes to core partners, the measurable ecological outcomes, and then just a minor change to the expert review team definition here to reflect the removal of implementation and development FIPS. But I'll pause here and see if there's questions on any of those definitions.
I have a quick question, and that was whether there's any informal understanding of what long-term it means, like more than 10 years, more than 5 years, or is that left to the groups to kind of describe when they describe their outcomes?
Yeah, that's a good question, Leah. And we don't have it defined here, and we've left it up to partnerships as a part of their application materials and their strategic action plan to provide that description. But yeah, I see Denise has taken a note about if we want to get into the definition of a long-term.
Just a nitpicking thing, and this is not a suggestion, but long-term ecological effects. I guess it's implicit that those are beneficial, but maybe long-term ecological benefits or something to that effect. But I'm not suggesting changing stuff you haven't already identified, but if you are going through at that level.
No, I think that's a good suggestion. I want to make sure if we're implementing work that it has a beneficial or a positive effect.
I have a question about the reference to the board and the expert and TRT definitions. I'm just wondering if that's needed. Like, because the board composition from OWEB, I'm assuming this is referencing back to OWEB's board of directors. And I'm just wondering if that is actually that pertinent, because the membership of that does shift, and I know there is some static agency representation, but you guys also have at-large seats and others, and I don't know, I just wonder if that's needed for these definitions. It almost seems like just a little bit from like a DEI perspective that's like a little limiting, and like it just might not be necessary.
So you'd suggest, just statewide knowledge and interdisciplinary expertise appropriate to evaluate.
Yeah, it just doesn't seem like you need to put a qualifier on defining the pool, that it might be better to leave that open, and it's really just kind of that expertise is what you're seeking.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. Okay. So then we have a technical review team, which is the just to make sure folks understand how this is different. So the expert review team is the group of individuals that is reviewing the initiative applications, and then the technical review team are reviewing the project level applications for partnerships that are involved in the FIP program. We just, in the TRT definition, removed implementation, as we did in the next definition for work plan. Jamie, I see your hand is raised.
It seems inconsistent as to when you're using focused investment partnership versus when you're using focused investment partnership initiative. Is that intentional, that initiative is in number 7, but not in number 8 or number 9?
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't think it was intentional, but I'll look to my colleagues if they see or read it differently.
I don't think that was intentional, and they should be consistent.
Yeah.
Well,
go ahead, Denise.
So I think what we're trying to differentiate is the initiative level grants that are for awarding the FIP initiative versus the project level grants that are the individual projects that are a result of being awarded a FIP. So the initiative application is that big application for the whole 6 years. We don't need to say focused investment partnership initiative here, because we're talking about those individual project applications that are submitted once you've been awarded a FIP and you're working through getting your projects awarded.
Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying, Denise. And that it might make sense then in 8 to not have initiative, but I think, Jamie, your point is well taken. We want to make sure as we go through this to make sure if we're using initiative in some locations and not in others, that we're being consistent with that approach.
Yeah, that we have those 2 levels of application review.
Might warrant or consider an additional definition, because I think what Denise just said is very clear. I'd have to scroll back up to see if initiative was defined earlier.
We do define initiative earlier.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Is it possible to share this document with us so that we can scroll around in it?
It's in the calendar invite for the meeting from today, so you can pull it up right now too.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, good discussion. As we kind of depart from the definition section, just as a reminder that we'll probably be going back there in future meetings, particularly as we either add new terms or as we're the definitions that we just kind of went through fairly quickly, we're actually talking about how they're referenced in the rules themselves. So we might be very well coming back up here and doing some more edits in the definition section. But really appreciate that discussion there. Okay, the next section is the board identified priorities. And this says at least every 5 years, the board, the OWEB board, shall approve ecological priorities of significance to the state to be addressed by focused investment partnership initiatives. The ecological priorities shall be determined with public input, scientific rigor, and shall include maps and narrative describing the desired ecological outcomes for eligible FIP initiative activities. So, earlier in the FIP program overview, we had the 7 ecological priorities that the board adopted back in 2015, and then again with some revisions in 2020. We've had some discussion with the board grants committee about this because we're right on that 5-year timeline of needing to have the board look at potentially revise the board identified priorities. The board grants committee has signaled their intent to dive into this starting in the spring of 2025. So it would be after or about the same time we're soliciting for the next cohort of FIPs. The board would be looking at potential revision to the board identified priorities. You'll notice that we don't actually have the 7 described in rule here, just that this is what the board will be doing basically every 5 years. So,
and Eric, do we want to take a break here because it's now 10 o'clock?
Thank you, Denise. Good timekeeping. are folks good for a 15-minute break? Okay, we'll come back at 10:17. Denise, I can see your email. Okay, so hope everybody enjoyed their 15-minute break. We are well ahead of schedule right now, and I know we have a few people on the line that are observing. We also have a scheduled public comment period that right now is on the agenda as 11:30. We're probably going to be moving that up quite a bit because we only have a few other sections in the rules that we want to get through today. So if you are considering making public comment, I would be prepared to deliver that here fairly shortly. And we left off with the board identified priorities. I described a little bit of what the intent with the board to look at these here within the next year. But I wanted to pause and see if there's any questions both on that or on the rules as written with the priorities.
Eric, I had a question. I wasn't sure if I understood. Was the board interested in memorializing the 7 priorities here or just the existence of priorities that are evaluated every 5 years?
Yeah, thanks, Leah. More the latter. Yeah, rather than having them written in rule, which again, you know, if they were to change, would require opening them back up for rulemaking. Okay, so if there are, see a comment in the chat from Jamie. Partnership should be partnership in the sentence. At least every 5 years, the board shall approve ecological priorities of significance to the state be addressed by focused investment partnership initiatives. Yes. Good catch. Okay, so moving on, the next section is eligibility. We have quite a bit of red line here, but it is mostly getting back to the point of removing FIP development language from the rules. So right now we would have the board would only consider focused investment partnership initiative applications that address the board identified priority of significance to the state and to be implemented by a high performing partnership. Stop there, see if there's questions, concerns.
Yeah, I did have a question, and I'm sorry if I missed this before. I think, if I understand correctly, the difference between the implementation and the development in the past was that there was funding that allowed groups to get together to develop their strategic action plans and put together a lot of the governance structure and all of that. And that's what the development grant was for. And then once they got those in place, then they could apply for the implementation side. So one, I guess, am I correct in that? And if that's was the case, then if that's being taken away, then is there an avenue for groups to get together to do that development separately now? Because that's hugely important, because that is very time consuming and expensive.
Yeah, maybe I'll turn to Denise if you want to talk a little bit about partnership technical assistance here.
Yeah, so Christy, OWEB currently has an offering called Partnership Technical Assistance that has 2 tracks within it. One is for groups, partnerships who want to come together around, an initiative to develop their strategic action plan.
Okay.
The separate track is for groups who already have their strategic action plan and need some capacity support for the implementation of that plan. And so that offering got moved out of FIP and into partnership TA in recognition that not every group who develops a strategic action plan will go on to become a FIP. That some groups may develop a strategic action plan and just decide to work in OWEB's open solicitation program and work through, their prioritized actions. Groups could use that strategic action plan to apply for funding from, other funders. So that need is still there. OWEB recognizes that need, but we moved it out of here to make it more broadly available. So, and I'm happy to set up a separate time to talk with you about that offering and what's included in it.
Okay, no, that's fine. I'm just, and I don't know that needs to be specified in the rule then, but perhaps it would be helpful on whatever web page is there that just is explained that funding is now somewhere else. Because I think just because it's been that way for quite a while, people might just wonder, how do I get that funding?
Great, thanks, Christy. Good question. Anything else in eligibility before we move on?
I have a question about match, and it's just sort of I'm not suggesting any changes, but I was just curious. I know a lot of programs are considering reducing match requirements to make grant opportunities more broadly available to groups that just might not have the same access that previously. And I was curious whether kind of what the 25% match, where that comes from and what the thinking behind it is, I suppose.
Yeah, That's a great question, Leah. And we've moved on here to the section 0050 with the application requirements and Denise has highlighted the 25% match component here that is being sought. And we'll talk a lot about match, I think, as a part of this RAC. As many of you probably know, last year, OEB actually revised through our Division 5 rules that match, the 25 match requirements went away, and it is instead on a offering by offering basis. We still have a 25% requirement for grant types like restoration, where we acknowledge that there's often a lot more opportunity to leverage additional outside entities for that match. And then we've dropped it down to $1 for grant types like our engagement. So the 25% match, we haven't talked about this with the board grants committee or the broader board in general, but this might be an area that we could like I said, we'll definitely be discussing match as we go throughout this process, but whether the 25% at a programmatic level is appropriate, or do we want to do it at the individual grant level, which would say 20, if we're following what is in OEB's open solicitation grant program now, would be 25% for restoration grants.
Look at that, I am in as me.
$1 for engagement and technical assistance. So I think it's a little bit of a, we'll put a bookmark here and be sure to talk about that as we get a little bit farther in the rules.
Yeah, I'd like to just kind of jump on what further what Leah was saying, and that with all of the bipartisan infrastructure funding that's coming through, a lot of that does not require any match, and it makes it easier for more diverse organizations to get together. And if you're looking at it through a DEI lens, they're trying to get away from requiring match because it can be restrictive on the types of organizations that can get together and do that. It tends to favor larger organizations, and it will frequently limit small groups that there's just a lot of studies that have gone into who gets knocked out of the competition if the more match that you require. So maybe there are ways to have it be matches recommended, or match would be considered or is encouraged, or maybe match isn't required, or leverage is required, or something. There's a difference between match and leverage. So there might be a lot of other options that could be considered if that is a necessity. But the more match that you require, the more groups that you're going to restrict from participating.
Yeah, thanks, Christy. And this also gets at, we're not going to talk about our evaluation criteria during this meeting, and we'll save it for the next one. But there is one of the evaluation criteria that includes the ability of the partnership to catalyze additional investments, which kind of gets to the match question a little bit as well. So yeah, I think it's definitely a place where we'll want to focus some discussion.
And I definitely recognize that I misread the comments. I thought it was like work through this section. This meeting was like that one, not stopping at that at that point. So I think you guys meant to touch on this in the future. So apologies for opening that.
Oh no, we were trying to make it through the application requirements section. So yeah, it's a good comment. And I think it's something that, like I said, we'll definitely want to, you know, come back to this group with to try to get your thoughts on as we move throughout the rules. The other, or really the proposed edits to this section, you know, again, we removed the development language, and then did a little tinkering with the language in one, you know, in 1A, we're saying instead of a form, the format. This is a bit of a technicality. We made this language revision in our Division 5 rules. We're not really using forms anymore. Everything's electronic. So we have a format. And you'll see this in our rules that we're trying to differentiate between what OWEB, the agency, is doing and what OWEB, the board, is doing in our rules. And you know, here we're saying the board itself is not prescribing the format. It's something that OWEB staff are doing. So we're going through our rules and trying to make sure that we're keeping OWEB staff doing what OWEB staff does, and then the OWEB board doing their responsibilities. And Denise is frantically waving her arms, so I'll stop.
Yeah, Eric, I just want to ask that you lean in and speak up a little bit. A chat has asked that you're really faint, and you're really faint for me as well.
Oh.
So if you want to speak up a bit, that would be helpful. Thanks.
Thanks, Denise. Is this better? No. I'll try.
I have a question for Eric while he's working on audio. Just the discussion just made me think of this. Is there, you talked about delineating what the OWEB board does versus what OWEB does. And that was kind of part of my question earlier when you're referencing board stuff. There's not a definition of that in the definition section of when you say OWEB, that you're actually referring to just like the agency, and the board with a capital B is board, OWEB's board. Is that just because that's like a general Division 5 definition, so it's just assumed in the subsequent rules that those terms are clear?
I'm going to switch over to a phone. Eric, do you mind answering Haley's question there?
Yeah, thanks. I'm trying to open up my Division 5 rules here. I thought that we did tackle that in Division 5, but let me just confirm that for you as I get to the right place here.
Yeah, that probably makes sense, just because like in the realm of web and FIP and OWEB work, there's a lot of boards, and so just it being like clear.
Yeah, so it is in Division 5. There's a definition of board, which means the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board created under ORS 541-9. And then there's also a definition of OWEB, which just simply means the OWEB state agency. And so those rules, as Eric mentioned earlier, apply to all the other rules. You know, OWEB Division 5 is sort of the overarching rules that cover everything. And so if there's a word that's not defined in a specific division, you could look back to Division 5 for the appropriate definition. And also, while Eric's switching to just some food for thought on the match issue. In this biennium, the board acted on a change it made in those Division 5 rules previously, where it changed the requirement of 25% match to the board can specify a match requirement with each offering. And in thinking about that, the board recognized that in particular for technical assistance projects and for engagement projects, those are more difficult to find matching funds for. And so in the current biennium, those offerings in open solicitation have match requirements of $1 instead of 25%. They kept restoration at 25%. And I think part of that is sort of the origins of our work in the Oregon plan and what was envisioned for a preference for multi-partner projects to get restoration on the ground through voluntary conservation. And they kept that restoration match at 25%. Something to think about is FIPS do, of course, incorporate all of those grant types: restoration, technical assistance, engagement, monitoring, and sometimes acquisition. And food for thought there is because we're including TA and engagement, should the overall FIP match be somehow changed? I think the goals of the FIP, of course, as we've talked about, are to make progress toward ecological outcomes. And so there is kind of a heavier weight on the restoration and acquisition actions in FIPS. And that might be an argument for keeping the match at 25%, but just wanted to provide that a little additional background on the board's thinking around match and how it has changed because of the issues that Christy and Leah have pointed out today.
I'll just chime in to say that for the 20 FIP initiatives that have been awarded to date, we haven't had any that have had any difficulty securing at least 25, and all the partnerships have secured significantly more than 25% match for their initiative because of the nature of a focused investment partnership with all of those partners coming together and having that strategic action plan, being able to secure funding from other organizations has been something that those folks have been successful at doing so far. So.
And Brad has a hand up.
Yeah, I want to just a quick comment. I have two, one on match and just clarifying. I think that the match is programmatic in terms of the way OWEB treats it, not project based. Is that still the case? So you can go in and propose a project that doesn't have match, but match is measured at the programmatic level. So that's
what the current rules say. Yes.
And then the other one is just more format question. You'll have to excuse my my detail orientation here, but when we strip the pieces out of the application requirements section, all that really says is you submit it on a form, which makes sense. I don't know that we need to say that. And then it has this match component. And I'm struggling a bit with how that's different than eligibility. Do we really need both of those sections? And eligibility says, I think, let me look at my copy here. What does eligibility have in it? It has the board identified priority in the high performing partnership. And as we discussed earlier, it doesn't say anything about strategic action plan, which we discussed is a requisite component. So I'm wondering if we're, we've got a few ideas in there, eligibility, application requirements. I'm just not 100% clear, not a big deal, but once we got this section, really matches the only thing that's in here other than saying, hey, submit it on, the most current format. So I don't know whether that was intentional, but anyway, those might be combined or made whole in terms of what you actually, the components you need to have in place before applying. In my mind would be the strategic action plan, the high performing partnership. You know, it's addressing a priority, and maybe there's one more, but anyhow, just a thought.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. Just a note on that, the high performing partnership definition says that you've got an SAP and a governance structure. And so that's incorporated into the definition. So a little bit of economy of words there by using the definition that's called out. And yeah, I think regarding the application requirements, it's kind of a standard thing, and perhaps it is a bit of a relic from the old days of paper form. You know, we spent a lot of time talking about what kind of forms have to be required. I think I would leave that one to our rules guru to figure out if we should combine those sections or not, which is Eric. But yeah, there certainly isn't a lot of content in either of these, and I think they could easily be combined without losing any meaning in here. So thanks for that.
Yeah, and thanks for the clarification on the embedded pieces in that high performing. I hadn't looked back at that.
All right, it looks like Eric might still be trying to call in. Have you succeeded, Eric? It looks like you came off mute.
I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Apologies for my earbuds deciding to do what they do on occasion. And thanks, Eric, for stepping in there. I did hear that last bit, and I think we might be able to look and see what we have in Division 5 with the application requirements as well. We could do some combining here, and I think, although we'd have to just do our due diligence and double check on requirements and eligibility. Okay. Here's a comment from Andy. Private Forest Accord grant program, we separate out application requirements from eligibility in a similar way. So thanks for that. Yeah, well, we can also look at your rules as well and make sure that you know, we have a good approach that makes sense for everybody. Okay, so that was as far as we proposed to go in the rules today, because the next section is evaluation criteria. You'll see, and this is for the RAC and for those observing, we do have some revisions in the evaluation criteria and in some of the future sections as well. This is kind of the low-hanging fruit that we just kind of went through and easily made these revisions. I would expect for the next set of meetings some additional revisions, you know, potentially in the evaluation criteria and beyond. And we'll be getting that out to the RAC and posted to our website well in advance of the next RAC meeting. So with that, unless there's any other questions on the sections that we just walked through, we can stop and see if there's any public comment.
Eric, do you want me to stop sharing for public comment?
Yeah, please. That'd be great, Janice. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so if you do have public comment, can you please raise your Zoom hand or your physical hand if you can't find the Zoom hands on the very busy screen now. And I'll call on folks as I see you. Starting with Lindsay.
Hi. Thanks for letting us listen in. I don't know if now is the right time, but since the match thing came up, I just thought I would share some perspectives from our side of things. Oh, I'm the manager for the East Cascades Oak Partnership, FIP, North Central Oregon. And the perspective I'd like to offer is just that programmatic match requirement I see as a really strong advantage of the FIP program generally, that it offers flexibility across those different grant programs and across partners and across ownerships that I think is super valuable. And FIPs have already met kind of a high bar for demonstrating commitment and strategy and some of the things that sometimes match is used to ensure. And I think one clarification that could be helpful and that I would lobby for including would be that match dollars can be generated from projects that aren't even utilizing OWEB dollars. That's something that you can do in programs like NACA, the North American Wetlands Conservation Act. And that can help alleviate pressure on projects that might be smaller in nature or on private lands or on tribal lands where match might be harder to come by. But you can bring in like these power hitters like the U.S. Forest Service or these big partners that can help the partnership meet the match requirement and then provide a lot of flexibility in getting other smaller projects done. So that's just some perspective that I would share from an implementation viewpoint. And then the other thing is just a minor thing. Is around language. So whenever I'm talking about the FIP just internally with our partners, the language around match is kind of tricky. When I say programmatic match, that's pretty clear. Initiative, like when I'm talking about the proposal for the FIP, right, that sets up the FIP, and that the match requirement happens at that level. But then I have to explain how match has to be documented through individual grant agreements. That's kind of confusing for our partners. So I think just some language consistency, or maybe this already exists and I'm just interpreting it poorly, but kind of like programmatic match that's always delivered through individual project agreements. Or if there's another mechanism to document match at that programmatic level, that might be something interesting to explore. And I think that is it for me.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Lindsay. Yeah, we will definitely be discussing the programmatic match elements of FIP as we progress in these RAC meetings.
Thank you.
Are there any other folks on the line that wish to provide public comment at this time? Okay, I am not seeing any hands, either virtual or real. So we're going to wrap up the public comment periods. And again, if you are listening, we do have an opportunity in advance of each RAC meeting to provide written public comment. The comment period is usually open until a day or so before each RAC meeting. So really do urge you to read up on the rule revisions as they are posted. And if you have thoughts, either provide written materials or come in and provide verbal testimony as Lindsay just did. Okay, so we're just about ready to wrap up for today. We're getting done quite a bit early, which is probably no surprise. given kind of these initial few sections of rules that we walk through. But I really appreciate the discussion on each of those sections. I'm always amazed, and I'm really pleased at how our RACs are able to dive into, sometimes pretty good minutia, and it really makes for a really good process. And looking forward to getting into even more substantive discussion. So the next RAC meeting is scheduled for Monday, July 29th at 9 a.m. So we have almost a month. In the meantime, OEB staff will be taking into consideration all of the comments and suggestions that were made today in the first few sections that we walked through. And as I said earlier, we'll put those revisions out in advance of the next RAC meeting. We'll start back up again at the top and show folks where changes were made to the draft rules, and then we'll be walking through some of the next sections, including the evaluation criteria. And Audrey, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I just was noting the comment in the chat from Brad about kind of clarifying the levels of match, and thought FIP staff might want to do that real quick.
Yeah, so I started replying to Brad, and I don't know if we want to have this conversation today, Eric. I'm looking at Hartstein. Do you want to clarify? Or hold off?
Yeah, so I'm just reading the comment right now.
And Denise, I meant sort of conceptually, not in terms of documentation, just going back to what Lindsay was saying, is like, where is this match actually being documented? Because I know from being in FIPS that, yeah, in the initiative, when you're applying, you've got to sort of say, yeah, we'll do this. When it comes to the money stage, the programmatic 2-year, that's where it really, I think, where the rubber hits the road. And then there's the projects, which cumulatively you've got to get to the biennial award match. But anyway, just it's more conceptual than actual. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we're going to have probably a pretty rich discussion on this. We've maybe struggled a little bit with the programmatic versus project level match ourselves as staff, and I think when we get there, we'd like to make it much more clear for everybody. So thank you for the question. Okay, are there any questions on either today or what to expect at the next RAC meeting? Okay, not seeing any. Thank you so much for your time this morning. It was great. And if you want to reach out to any of OEB staff, between now and the second RAC meeting, I think we're all open for discussion. If you have any questions, happy to hop on the phone. Otherwise, I hope your summer is off to a great start, and we'll see you again in about a month.